Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. Today, I'm talking about some classic albums I've never listened to. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So I'm sure a lot of you out there can relate with this. There's just some albums that, for one reason or another, have always just kind of fallen through the cracks, and it's not until years later where I stop and think to myself, there's a lot of people that love this album. It's rated really highly on, all the top 10 lists or the 500 greatest albums of all time. But for one reason or another, I've just never listened to them. The first one is almost embarrassing to even mention because I own a copy of this album. And I don't know why. I've got a friend that loves this album. I've heard chunks of this album. I've never actually sat down and listened to this album from beginning to end. And that's All Things Must Pass by George Harrison. I know a lot of people out there that, think this is one of the best albums of the 70s. And I like I said, I've listened to several songs off of it. I know it's really good quality. Like I said, I bought the anniversary edition that came out a few years ago. And from the songs I've listened to off of it, I know it's a really good album. I've got no excuses for this one. It's just a bad one on me that I haven't listened to this one. Another one that's kind of along the same lines is Blue by Joni Mitchell. I have listened to chunks of this album. I know it's a highly influential album. It's widely seen as one of the greatest albums of all time. Actually, I had a ex-girlfriend back when I was in high school that loved this album. She had it on CD. I've listened to several songs off of it. But it's another one of those albums where I've just never sat down and listened to it. Even though I've listened to other Joni Mitchell albums, this is one of those ones that's kind of fallen through the cracks. And I guess what makes this pick so bad is Blue and California, which are two tracks off of Blue, are two of my favorite Joni Mitchell songs. If you've been watching the channel for a while, the next one shouldn't come as any real big surprise, and that's Moving Pictures by Rush. Rush is a band that I've tried to listen to multiple times. And for one reason, I guess I know the reason. The reason I cannot listen to Rush is Geddy Lee's voice. His vocals absolutely drive me crazy. I've listened to 2112. I've listened to a couple other Rush albums. I've heard Tom Sawyer, so I have heard music off of this album. But it's one of those albums I've just never sat down and listened to. I know I should try, because I know a lot of people love this album. I should try to listen to this one, but, like I said, I just can't get past Geddy Lee's vocals. I know Rush musically is a really great band. It just kind of, like I said, his vocals are just a full-on stop for me. So I've been a big Bob Marley fan probably since I was maybe like 13 or 14 years old, but I've never listened to the album Exodus. And I guess that's because I've always considered myself a Bob Marley fan, but I think I've always been a fan of Legend, because that's the album I grew up listening to. It's primarily the only Bob Marley album I listened to for, a good couple of decades. It wasn't until several years ago before I started digging more into Bob's catalog. And he's got some great albums. Exodus, I know, is a great album. It's got a couple of my favorite Bob Marley tracks on there. It's actually got my wife's favorite Bob Marley track on there also. I think it's probably the biggest example on my list of an album where it just fell through the cracks. I think another album like Exodus is Innervisions by Stevie Wonder. Innervisions was a huge landmark album for Stevie. This is the album where I think he really fully transitioned from that little Stevie Wonder musician into a more mature musician. And I think it was also the first album where Stevie played every instrument on the entire album. It's a huge album. It's one of the biggest albums of the 70s. And as much as I love Stevie Wonder's 70s albums, I think this is the only one I've never listened to. Another album that's kind of embarrassing to say is Pearl by Janis Joplin, because I've owned it on cassette. I bought it on cassette back in the 90s. I've owned this on CD also. I've listened to, I think it's mainly because I kind of compare this a little bit to the Bob Marley situation, because it was the same way. I grew up listening to Janis Joplin's greatest hits. I know all those songs. It's a lot of the stuff that's on Pearl is on her greatest hits compilation. I know this is an album that is held up as, not only one of the greatest albums of the early part of the 70s, but one of the greatest albums of all time. And I think it's a situation where after listening to her greatest hits for years and years, I just naturally gravitate more to that album rather than listening to Pearl. Another album some of you might not be surprised by is In Rainbows by Radiohead. I have been very critical of Radiohead's post OK Computer albums. And even I've been critical of OK Computer, even though I think it is a really good album. I don't think it's as great as people make it out to be. But, I listened to Kid A, I listened to Hail to the Thief, I listened to all those albums when they were released. And I just didn't, there was just not enough there to make me want to listen to more Radiohead albums. So I just never got around to listening to Rainbows. I know I should listen to it because, I do like some of the stuff that's on those other albums. There's just not enough there that made me want to listen to In Rainbows when it was released. But I know it's kind of widely seen as one of the best albums of the 2000s. And I've got a friend that loves the album. And he's even tried to get me to listen to it before. And I just, for one reason or another, and I've just always kind of passed over it. The next one's one that might make some people mad out there. And that's Can't Buy a Thrill by Steely Dan. So Steely Dan is one of those bands I've always considered hugely overrated. Yes, there's some good stuff on Asia. I've listened to a lot of their bigger hits across their discography. But other than a couple of big tracks, there's never been enough to really make me want to dig deeper into their discography. So yeah, I have listened to several songs off this album, but I've never sat down and listened to this album from beginning to end, and I probably never will. And whenever Steely Dan comes up, people always say, or people that know me at least, always say, well, you love jazz music, and you love rock music, so why wouldn't you love this jazz rock fusion that Steely Dan does? And that's because I do love jazz music, but I pretty much only listen to 50s, 60s, and very early 70s jazz music. Once jazz started incorporating itself into rock music, that's really when I kind of stopped listening to it. Or that's the end of the period that I listened to. So it makes perfect sense to me why I would never really get into Steely Dan's music. They're not a bad band. And I don't want people to take it as me saying that. They're just, I don't think they're as great as people make them out to be. And there's just, like I said, there's not enough to pull me into their discography. And I'll throw In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson in there also because, so progressive rock, and I get it that this album is one of the biggest and most influential progressive rock albums of the late 60s and early 70s. But progressive rock is a genre that I have always struggled with. And there's a lot of progressive rock music that, to me, comes off as overly pretentious, complex for just to be complex. And it's like I said, it's a genre I struggle with. It's a genre I struggle to get into. Even though I do love a couple of progressive rock albums, this is one that, I don't know. And I guess I never grew up with anyone that was, any of my friends were ever King Crimson fans. So maybe that's why it kind of played into that, some of it. But, it's one I should listen to because I don't really have anything against King Crimson. I think they were good musicians, but I think I've only listened to maybe 2, maybe 3 of their songs total across their career. And the last one, to be honest, is just dumb. Because it's dumb that I've never listened to it. Because I'm a huge punk fan. I love the CBGB scene from New York in the mid-late 70s. But not only have I never listened to Television, which is a hugely influential album in that scene, but I've never listened to Marquee Moon, which is their best-known album. And one that, I'm sure if anyone out there has listened to Television before, it's probably this album. This is a band that was hugely influential in helping form that punk scene in New York in the 70s. So it just makes sense I would listen to it. This is truly one where it's completely fallen through the cracks. I've got no reason why I've never listened to it. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. I'd love to know what you guys think of this. What are some albums that are out there, some big classic albums that for one reason or another you've never listened to? Because I know I'm probably missing some big ones off the top of my head because there's a lot of music out there. There's been a lot of music a lot of great music that's been recorded over the last 60 or 70 years. And like I said, sometimes these albums just kind of fall through their cracks. But let me know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.